Hello and welcome to video number 7. This is for AQA Psychology, syllabus 7181 and 7182, and this video is about biopsychology, the divisions of the nervous system, central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, somatic and autonomic. What is the nervous system? The nervous system is a connected system of nerves, nerve cells, that runs throughout the whole body, and the nerve cells are connected to one another by synapses. The largest part of the nervous system is obviously the brain, but the nervous system extends down the spinal cord and into every tiny little part of the body as well. Imagine an aeroplane flying through the air on autopilot. What is the autopilot and what does it do? Well, the autopilot is, in one sense, a computer that controls and directs everything in the aeroplane. But it's also a system of wires that run through the aeroplane, collecting information from the outside world and controlling all the bits and pieces. For example, the autopilot is connected to the radar and it's connected to the altimeter of the aeroplane. So the autopilot collects information from the environment, and the autopilot knows where the aeroplane is at any one point in time. The autopilot is also connected by wires to things like the rudder and to the throttle that controls the engine, so that the autopilot can also control the motion of the aeroplane through the air. And this autopilot also controls the internal environment of the aeroplane as well, how much oxygen is in the breathing air and what the temperature inside is like, and so on. Well, the nervous system of the human body is like the autopilot in the aeroplane, and the central computer of the autopilot is the brain of the human body, computing, controlling, coordinating all information and actions. But that autopilot needs to be connected by wires to other parts of the aeroplane, and in the same way our brains are connected by nerve cells. So my brain is connected by nerve cells to my eyes and to my fingertips, so that when I feel things and when I see things, nervous impulses run along the nerve cells and into my brain. And equally, my brain is connected by nerve cells to my muscles as well, so that I can control the movements of my body. And in this way, the nervous system is like the autopilot of an aeroplane, controlling and coordinating the actions of the body. Okay, for the exam, we need to know the diagram about the divisions of the nervous system. And the first thing that we really need to know is that the divisions of the nervous system are anatomical. That is to say that the parts of the diagram refer to where the nerves are in the body and not what they do. So the most easy to understand part of this diagram is the central nervous system. And very simply, the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. If a nerve cell is in the brain and or the spinal cord, then it is a central nervous system nerve cell. And the brain is, in our analogy of the autopilot, like the central computer of the autopilot. The brain is literally the nerve centre of the body. And there are some parts of the brain which we probably need to know about. The cerebrum, to start with, is the outer part of the brain. And this is where our higher thinking goes on, our cognitive functions. So mathematics, music, religion, art and A-levels all take place in the cerebrum of the brain. The cerebellum, on the other hand, which is located at the back and at the bottom of the brain, one of the things that the cerebellum does is to do with skilled motion. So if you play a musical instrument, or if you're really good at tennis, or if you sign your name, then these skilled physical actions are partially controlled by the cerebellum. The diencephalon is a part of the brain right in the middle. Right in the middle, and our diencephalon is very, very similar to other mammals' diencephalons. And the diencephalon contains parts of the brain which conduct very basic housekeeping functions in our body. For example, making sure that we get hungry and thirsty at the right times, regulating our sex drive and our body temperature, and so on. And the brainstem as well is connecting the brain to the spinal cord. The spinal cord is a body of nerve fibres which runs up and down in the middle of our body inside an armoured conduit in the spine. And this is the main input and output for the brain. And the spinal cord contains spinal nerves. These nerves run from the brainstem down the spinal cord, and then they branch out, carrying messages and taking information to the rest of the body. There's also some neural processing takes place actually inside the spinal cord itself, and this is called spinal reflexes, and more about these in the next video, video number 8. The peripheral nervous system, on the other hand, is everything else. The central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is the whole of the rest of the nervous system, apart from those two things. And there are nerve cells, neurons, which are in both the central and the peripheral nervous system. If a nerve cell starts out in the spinal cord and then branches out to go to somewhere else in the body, then that individual nerve cell spans both the peripheral and the central nervous systems. Now, before we go too much further, we also need to know two pieces of vocabulary, and they are afferent and efferent. And they describe two types of nerve cells. An afferent nerve cell, or afferent pathway, is bringing information from the outside world towards the brain, towards the central nervous system. And an efferent nerve cell, or an efferent pathway, on the other hand, is taking information from the brain towards the extremities. For example, the nerve cells which control the muscles which make us move. Because nerve cells and nervous pathways are one-way streets. Nerve impulses only ever travel in one direction down a nerve cell or a nervous pathway. And that is why nervous pathways are like dual carriageways. You have to have one afferent nervous pathway to bring the information from the senses and a corresponding efferent nervous pathway to control the muscles. The somatic nervous system. The somatic nervous system connects the central nervous system to the rest of the body. So, for example, if I clap my hands, there is a physical sensation in the skin on the palms of my hands. And that sensation travels in a nervous impulse up a nervous pathway in my arm and enters the spinal cord. When that nervous pathway is in my arm and my shoulder, then it is a part of the somatic nervous system, which is a part of the peripheral nervous system. When that nervous pathway is in my spine, travelling up towards my brain, then it is a part of the central nervous system. And equally, when I waggle my fingers, the nervous impulse which causes that to happen starts in my brain, travels down the spinal cord in the central nervous system, and as it exits the spine, it travels into a spinal nerve in the somatic nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, and travels down to the skeletal muscles in my fingers to make them move. The somatic nervous system consists of 31 pairs of spinal nerves and 12 pairs of cranial nerves. And a spinal nerve is not in the spine, it's in the somatic nervous system, the peripheral nervous system. It is the nerve which joins onto the spine. That's why it's called a spinal nerve. And remember, every spinal nerve all of the spinal nerves come in pairs because there is both an afferent and an efferent pathway in each one. The 12 pairs of cranial nerves don't go anywhere near the spine. They simply emerge directly from the brain and they innervate everything in the head, basically the lips, the tongue, the mouth, eyes, and so on. Broadly speaking, the somatic nervous system collects information from the environment via our sensory cells and relays it to the central nervous system and controls our voluntary movement. Again, the central nervous system is in command, but the peripheral nervous system relays the messages to our muscles to control our voluntary movement, broadly speaking. Right, in a moment we're going to be looking at the autonomic nervous system, which is also a part of the peripheral nervous system, but first it's time for this week's random psychology fact.
This week's random psychology fact is anorexia nervosa means literally nervous loss of appetite. However, people with anorexia nervosa do get hungry, they just choose not to eat.
That was this week's random psychology fact. Okay, the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system connects the brain to the organs and glands of the body. Let's go back to our analogy of an aeroplane flying through the sky. And when the pilot directs the aeroplane to go to one or another airport, then he or she simply selects the airport and the autopilot does the rest. It controls the throttle and the rudder and so on to make the aeroplane fly to its desired destination. And that is analogous to the way that our brain controls our body via the somatic nervous system, voluntary motion. In the aeroplane, there's another control system as well, and that automatically regulates the internal environment of the body. It makes sure that the cabin pressure is right and that the temperature for the passengers is right and there's enough oxygen to breathe and so on. And this, in our bodies, is analogous to the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system connects the brain to the organs and glands in the body. The autonomic nervous system is divided into two branches, the sympathetic branch and the parasympathetic branch, and we'll look at those one by one. The sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system prepares the body for physical activity. The sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system activates the adrenal gland to release adrenaline into the bloodstream, and this speeds up our breathing to get more oxygen into the bloodstream. It speeds our heart rate up to carry that oxygen around the body, and it stimulates the liver to release glucose into the bloodstream, all to prepare our body for physical activity. And this is called the fight or flight mechanism. It's an evolved response to prepare our bodies for physical action if there is an external threat. Obviously that was really useful when we lived in the Stone Age, and external threats tended to be things that you either had to fight or run away from. That's the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. And if the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system is the accelerator pedal, then the brake pedal is the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, and that basically slows down everything that the sympathetic branch speeds up. And in addition to that, the parasympathetic branch stimulates our digestive system to get going and to digest food. And so the action of the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system is sometimes called the rest and digest system, and much more about those things in a later video. So this video has been about the divisions of the nervous system. on the one side, the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and on the other side, the peripheral nervous system, which is everything which is not the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system composed of the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system itself has two branches, the sympathetic branch and the parasympathetic branch.